We have to start in Mongolia. Every spring, as temperatures rise, camels naturally shed the thick winter coat they no longer need. For herders, this is an important seasonal moment. The loose fibers can be collected without having to remove the animal's entire coat. But this is where the first major selection begins. A camel's coat isn't made from one uniform type of hair. The outer layer contains longer, tougher fibers. Underneath is a much finer and softer layer. And that fine undercoat is the part that interests luxury textile manufacturers the most. The problem is that when the fibers are collected, everything is mixed together. Long fibers, short fibers, coarse fibers, fine fibers, dust, vegetation, and natural oils. At this stage, it doesn't look anything like luxury fabric. It simply looks like a huge mass of camel hair. And the factory's first challenge is to separate what is valuable from everything else. Once collected, the raw fiber is gathered and compressed into large bales. Those bales can then travel thousands of miles before reaching specialized textile facilities. When they arrive, each batch is weighed, identified, and recorded. This allows manufacturers to track the material throughout the production process. Then the bales are opened. Compressed fibers suddenly expand back into their natural volume. The factory begins filling with loose, golden-colored fiber. But this is still raw material. It hasn't been cleaned, it hasn't been refined, and most importantly, it hasn't been sorted. That comes next. The first major mechanical stage is opening and separating the fibers. Large machines loosen the compressed material and distribute it more evenly. The goal is to expose the individual fibers so they can be classified. Different mechanical systems and controlled airflow can help separate material according to characteristics such as size, weight, and fiber quality. Heavier and coarser material can be removed. Finer fibers continue through the process, and this is where one measurement becomes extremely important. Microns. A micron is 1/1000th of a millimeter. When you're working with luxury fibers, tiny differences in fiber diameter can have a major effect on how the final textile feels. The finer the appropriate fibers, the softer and more refined the finished fabric can become. So the material goes through multiple stages of refinement. At every stage, unwanted fibers are removed. The coarser material does not necessarily become useless. It can be redirected toward other textile applications, but the finest fibers continue toward the premium production line. What began as a chaotic mixture of hair is slowly becoming a controlled raw material, but it still contains dust, oils, and other impurities. Before it can become thread, it has to be cleaned. Raw camel fiber carries traces of everything it encountered during its natural life: dust, dirt, plant particles, natural oils, and other microscopic contaminants. So the fiber enters a carefully controlled washing process: warm water, specialized detergents, controlled temperatures. The objective is simple: clean the fiber without damaging its delicate structure. As the material moves through the washing stages, unwanted substances are removed. The fiber is then mechanically dewatered. And finally, controlled airflow helps complete the drying process. Temperature is critical here. Too much heat can damage delicate fibers. Too little can leave unwanted moisture behind. The entire process has to remain within a narrow range. Clean without destroying. Dry without weakening. And when the fiber finally emerges, it looks completely different. It is cleaner, lighter, fluffier, and ready for the next transformation. But there is still one major problem. The fibers are going in every direction. They need to be organized. Now comes the carding process. Its purpose sounds simple: align the fibers, but achieving that uniformity requires sophisticated machinery. The raw material enters the carding machine in a tangled mass. Some fibers point one way, others point another. Some are intertwined, others have different lengths. Thousands of fine metallic elements gradually separate and orient the fibers. The tangled mass becomes a thin, continuous web. The fibers begin moving in roughly the same direction. That web can then be condensed into a narrow strand. But premium textiles require another level of refinement. That is where combing comes in. Combing removes shorter fibers and unwanted material while keeping the longer, more desirable fibers. The result is dramatically different from the material that entered the factory. The fibers are now cleaner, longer, more aligned, and far more consistent. The camel hair no longer looks like loose animal hair. It begins to look like a true textile fiber. And now comes one of the most important transformations of the entire process, turning those individual fibers into yarn. The aligned fiber enters the spinning section. First, rollers gradually stretch the material. The strand becomes thinner and more uniform. Then comes the critical step, twisting. The fibers are twisted together at high speed. Thousands of rotations can transform loose fibers into a continuous thread. One fiber connects with another, then another, and another, until the entire structure becomes a single yarn. Large spools begin filling with the finished material, but appearance is not enough. The yarn has to perform. Its thickness must remain consistent, its tension must be controlled, and its strength has to meet strict requirements. Sensors can monitor the yarn as it is produced. Samples can be tested for strength and uniformity, because if the yarn fails here, the problem may not become obvious until much later. It could break during weaving, it could create irregularities in the fabric, or it could eventually affect the durability of the finished garment. That is why quality control begins long before the coat exists. Once the yarn passes inspection, it moves to the loom, and this is where the material finally begins to look like fabric. Hundreds or even thousands of individual threads have to be organized before weaving can begin. Some threads run lengthwise, others cross them from side to side. The loom brings these threads together in a precise repeating pattern. One pass, then another, then another. Slowly, a sheet of fabric begins to emerge. The machine moves at remarkable speed. But delicate fibers require careful handling. If the tension is too high, the yarn can break. If it is too low, the structure can become uneven. So the process is continuously monitored. When the fabric finally comes off the loom, it already looks recognizable. A soft, natural colored textile. But it is not finished. The raw fabric still needs to be treated. Its texture needs to be refined, its surface needs to be controlled, and its final appearance needs to be created. This is where the material begins its final transformation. The newly woven fabric enters a series of finishing processes. It can be washed and conditioned to stabilize the fibers. Additional treatments can modify the surface and improve the way the material feels. One important objective is to create the characteristic softness and fullness associated with premium camel hair fabrics. The surface fibers can be carefully raised. This creates a soft, slightly fuzzy texture, and it also contributes to the fabric's ability to trap air. That trapped air helps provide insulation, but the surface can't simply be left uncontrolled. Too much loose fiber, and the fabric can look uneven. Too little, and it can lose some of its characteristic texture. So the surface is carefully controlled and, where necessary, trimmed to achieve a consistent finish. Steam, pressure, and controlled heat can then help stabilize the fabric and improve its drape. At this point, we finally have something that could become a luxury garment, but we're still looking at a roll of fabric. The coat hasn't been created yet. Now the process becomes much more human. The finished fabric arrives in the garment-making section, and the nature of the work changes completely. Machines are still involved, but now patterns, measurements, and human judgment become just as important. A coat can contain dozens of individual components: front panels, back panels, sleeves, collars, lapels, pockets, linings. Each section has to be positioned carefully on the fabric. The goal is not simply to cut the shapes. The pieces must also be oriented correctly. The direction of the fabric matters. The appearance has to remain consistent, and the available material has to be used efficiently. Then the cutting begins. Sharp industrial blades follow the patterns, one section after another. And once a piece has been cut, there is no undo button. The components are separated, identified, and prepared for assembly. A roll of fabric has now become the building blocks of a coat, and this is where craftsmanship becomes impossible to ignore. The individual components are now assembled. The main panels are joined, internal structures provide shape, the sleeves are attached, and the coat slowly begins to take its final form. Some areas require particular precision: the shoulder, the sleeve, the collar, the lapels. These aren't simply decorative elements. They determine how the garment sits on the human body. A luxury coat shouldn't just look good on a hanger. It has to move naturally when someone wears it. The sleeve has to allow freedom of movement. The shoulder needs to maintain its shape. The lapel has to fall correctly. The lining needs to move smoothly against the clothing underneath. Then comes steaming. Heat and moisture allow the fabric to be shaped and stabilized. Seams settle. Edges become defined. The silhouette becomes clearer. And for the first time, the material that started as loose camel hair now unmistakably looks like a luxury coat. But the details still matter a lot. Buttons, buttonholes, edges, visible stitching, pocket construction. These details may look insignificant, but in luxury clothing, they can make the difference between a good garment and an exceptional one. Every seam is inspected. The alignment is checked. The symmetry is examined. Buttons are positioned carefully. And the surface of the fabric is inspected under controlled lighting, because a tiny defect that most people would never notice can become impossible to ignore when you are examining the garment at close range. Luxury is not simply about expensive material. It is about controlling the details. And that is why some of the final stages still depend heavily on skilled human hands. Machines can weave, machines can measure. But experienced craftsmen can recognize something that a measurement alone may not reveal. The way the fabric falls, the way the sleeve moves, the way the surface feels, the way the entire garment comes together. And finally, the coat reaches its last inspection. The finished garment is carefully examined from beginning to end. The fabric, the seams, the sleeves, the collar, the buttons, the lining, the symmetry, the surface, the overall shape. Nothing is supposed to escape inspection. If a defect is discovered, the garment can be sent back for correction, because every stage of the process has been designed around one simple principle. The final product can only be as good as the material and craftsmanship that went into it. And that is why the process began with something that looked almost worthless. Loose hair, collected from the natural shedding of an animal, sorted fiber by fiber, cleaned, refined, aligned, spun, woven, finished, sewn, and inspected. And this is the part that makes the entire process so fascinating. The material began its journey thousands of miles away, on the body of a camel in Mongolia. The animal simply shed its winter coat, something the camel did not need anymore. But after passing through an enormous chain of human skill and industrial technology, those discarded fibers can become something completely different. A luxury garment, a coat designed to be worn for years. And perhaps the strangest part of the story is that the camel never needed to be turned into a luxury product in the first place. It simply did what camels naturally do. It shed. The industry did the rest. From loose fibers scattered across the steppe, to perfectly aligned yarn, from yarn to fabric, from fabric to a finished coat. That's the real journey. Because when you see a camel hair coat hanging inside a luxury store, you're not just looking at a piece of clothing. You're looking at thousands of miles of transportation, hours of sorting, machines working with fibers measured in microns, washing and finishing processes, kilometers of yarn, thousands of passes through industrial looms, precision cutting, skilled sewing, and finally, the hands of people who turn all of those separate stages into a single finished product. From the hair a camel left behind to the coat the luxury world wants to wear. That's the hidden process behind camel hair. And it's a perfect example of something we see every day without ever thinking about it. The most valuable products don't always begin with something valuable. Sometimes they begin with something everyone else would simply throw away. If you enjoyed seeing what really happens behind the products we take for granted, subscribe to Source Code. Because behind every object, there's a process worth discovering. See you in the next one.